Can artificial intelligence teach me jazz, and will it be taking my job in the near future? Let's find out. So here I am over at ChatGPT, and I want to find out if artificial intelligence can give me some good steps to start learning how to play jazz. And of course, as a pro jazz musician and a jazz coach who spent over a decade playing and teaching jazz for a living, do I agree with it? So let's go ahead and type in this prompt right here. Give me 10 steps for learning to play jazz, starting at a beginner level and going to a pro level. Be specific with each step, and please only reveal one step at a time, because that'd be kind of a boring video if it just showed it all at once, right? So let's see what ChatGPT has to say. So step number 1 says, start with the blues. Begin your journey into jazz by immersing yourself in the blues. Study the basic 12-bar blues form. Learn to play jazz blues scales in different keys and familiarize yourself with the blues vocabulary. Practice improvising over the blues progression with using simple melodic ideas and rhythms. Mastering the blues will provide a solid foundation for understanding jazz harmony improvisation. Actually, for the most part, I would have to agree with ChatGPT here. Actually, starting with the blues is a really good place to start learning jazz because it's only a 12-bar form and it deals with like really important chord progressions in jazz. You got the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 1 chord, back to the 4 chord, and in jazz we do a sharp 4 diminished, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. And so once we have that foundation, it's actually a great springboard to other jazz standards. Another good reason to start with the blues for beginners is that a lot of musicians happen to know the minor pentatonic scale. Right? And so that's naturally a simple tool that someone can use to start improvising. And while it's an elementary way to start thinking about playing jazz, just simply using scales, it's a good starting place and tool to use. And the idea of using simple melodic ideas is a super good idea. Just simply, and just building off of it from there. So no matter how many notes you know how to play over top of a blues, anywhere is really a good start to start creating some good music. For example, listen to Miles Davis on the tune Freddie Freeloader. The way he plays over top of that tune is actually very simple and melodic and using a lot of these concepts. So I'd have to say, like, pretty good first step as far as ChatGPT goes, and certainly a starting place that I would suggest as well. All right, ChatGPT, reveal to me step 2. All right, step number 2 says learn basic jazz chords and voicings. Expand your chord vocabulary by learning basic jazz chords and voicings. Start with major and minor 7th chords, dominant 7th chords, and minor 7/flat-5 chords, also known as half diminished, and practice these chords in various inversions. Explore different voicings for piano and guitar. Understand and playing these essential chords will give the harmonic language to accompany jazz tunes and improvise over them. So I suppose this actually could be a decent step 2. I mean, the important thing that I like about step 1, starting with the blues, is you're gonna have to learn how to play some of these jazz chords, or we call them 7th chords, when you're learning a tune like the blues. So it's always good when you're learning material to apply it to a tune, which is exactly what we do in our Inner Circle membership. We learn one jazz standard every single month and apply everything to a tune. That helps you learn how to play jazz a lot better. But that being said, whether you play piano, guitar, or trumpet, saxophone, it is definitely important that you understand the basic chords that we find in jazz, which again is the major 7th chord, which is the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. And then we have the dominant 7th chord, the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the flat 7. And then we have the minor 7th chord, which is the root, the flat 3, the 5, and the flat 7. The half diminished chord, which is the root, the flat 3, the flat 5, and the flat 7. And finally, the one that ChatGPT didn't mention is the fully diminished 7th chord, which is the root, the flat 3, the flat 5, and the double flat 7. These are the default chords that we find in jazz. You're not really going to find triads as a default within jazz standards. So understanding the 5 basic 7th chords in jazz is really important. And so I'd recommend, if you're a horn player, being able to arpeggiate them just like I did. And certainly if you are a piano or guitar player, yeah, start learning some basic voicings, but always apply it back to the tune like a blues so that you're actually playing something in context. All right, let's reveal step 3. All right, step number 3 says study jazz standards and their progressions. Immerse yourself in the world of jazz standards. Choose a few iconic tunes and thoroughly study their chord progressions. Analyze the harmonic structure, identify key centers, and explore relationships between the chords. Start with simpler tunes like Autumn Leaves or Blue Bossa and gradually move onto more complex compositions. By studying jazz standards, you'll gain a deeper understanding of jazz harmony and develop the ability to navigate chord progressions with confidence. Dang, ChatGPT. I have to say, like, this is a reasonable step 3 because, like, right, step 1 was learning a song. Step 2 is like the chords, but then a chord progression, like, that's like chords strung together. That makes a lot of sense. They even mentioned Autumn Leaves as a really good starting tune, which I have to wholeheartedly agree. Like, honestly, after the blues, Autumn Leaves is kind of the one that I and many other jazz educators go to. And the reason that is because it covers the most important chord progressions in all of jazz. It starts with a major 2-5-1 chord progression, and then it goes to a minor 2-5-1 chord progression. And those are the most important chord progressions in all of jazz. Not only that, it actually covers the concept of what's called relative keys, which happens a lot in jazz standards. Autumn Leaves is in the key of concert G minor, but we actually start in its relative major, meaning that it shares the same key signature. So it's a 2-5 in B flat major, the relative major key, going to the parent minor, which is G minor. And that's really all the song is, and it's also a very simple melody to grapple onto, and one I would highly suggest learning by ear. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I cannot recommend more that you make learning jazz standards the center of your jazz education, even if you haven't learned jazz songs before. Don't get stuck in what scales do I need to know, or how do I know how to play every single chord or chord inversion and voicing. Like, let's just start by applying things to tunes, and I would say Autumn Leaves and Blue Bossa are definitely good starting places for understanding basics of jazz and harmony. Analyzing tunes is really important to do as well. We also do that in our color-coded chords analysis in our jazz standard studies in my Inner Circle membership, because understanding the harmony helps you just understand the framework of the song so you can memorize it better so that you don't get lost in it, and then helps you understand what you're actually trying to improvise over, and then you can go find note choices. All right, ChatGPT, reveal step 4. So step 4 is develop your ear through active listening. Listening is a crucial aspect of learning jazz. Actively listen to recordings of jazz musicians, paying close attention to their phrasing, articulation, and improvisational choices. Choose a variety of jazz styles and eras to expand your musical palette. Transcribe short phrases or solos by ear, aiming to capture the process and the nuances of the music. This process will enhance your ear training and help you internalize jazz vocabulary, allowing you to incorporate it into your own playing. Oh man, I'm starting to really worry about my job. So honestly, in some ways, they, in my opinion, combined a number of steps into step 4, but we'll give them a pass here. Technically speaking, if we're just talking about listening to jazz music and recordings, maybe that would be step 0.5, because honestly, that really has to be happening not only from the very beginning, but essentially all of the time. I often say to my students that listening to jazz and listening to music is also practicing, because you're internalizing a language, the way the jazz musicians would play things, getting familiar with tunes. You can actually do 50% of the learning process outside of your instrument just by listening to music. So this is definitely good advice, but it definitely should be starting from the very beginning, if certainly throughout. Now let's hone into this line here. Transcribe short phrases or solos by ear, aiming to capture the nuances of the music. This is actually really, really good advice, and it goes outside the traditional advice even of just learning jazz solos by ear and learning licks by ear so that you can internalize jazz language. It's actually talking about capturing the nuances of the music, where we're talking about phrasing, like how did Sonny Rollins phrase this line, or John Coltrane play it this way? How do we get a good swing feel? Like, simply by learning solos off of the records, you can start internalizing that within your ear, but also in the muscle memory on your instrument. So that's why so many jazz educators recommend learning stuff by ear off of records and internalizing it for yourself. Even though that doesn't quite get you to the improvisation process, it's your way of downloading some information, some language that you can start internalizing and eventually getting it out in your own solos. All right, let's reveal step number 5. Okay, step number 5 is learn jazz improvisation techniques and scales. To become a proficient jazz player, it's important to study improvisation techniques and scales commonly used in jazz. Begin by learning major and minor scales in all keys, as well as modes such as Dorian, Mixolydian, and Lydian. Practice playing these scales in different positions on your instrument. Explore jazz specific scales like bebop scales, diminished scales, altered scales, understand how to apply these scales over different chord progressions, and experiment with creating melodic lines using them. This step will help you develop your own improvisational skills and provide you with a toolkit for crafting jazz solos. Not bad, not bad. So this is really emphasizing the music theory portion of learning jazz. A lot of people actually go to scales as step number one, and so I do like that they're including this a little bit later on in their learning process here. That's because ultimately jazz improvisation isn't about playing scales or understanding music theory. Those are great tools to help you, but really it's about connecting what you hear in your head to your instrument, mimicking, copying. That's really the spirit of improvisation and the spirit of playing jazz. That being said, this music theory stuff is incredibly valuable to have in your back pocket. A quick word on scales is, scales are great for learning your instrument and navigating it well, but technically that doesn't necessarily have to do anything with jazz. It can just be beneficial to make sure you have great proficiency of navigating your instrument, because ultimately that will give you more freedom when you improvise. When it talks about jazz-specific scales like bebop, diminished scale, and altered scale, those are definitely good ideas to help you conceptualize jazz language, but I actually prefer concepts like enclosure patterns and other things like that to conceptualize bebop. And while the diminished scale is a scale that can be used, it's almost better to think about using the arpeggio of a diminished chord and just simply approaching those chord tones by half steps and whole steps. Really, jazz is more about resolutions than it is about linear patterns like scales. The altered scale is a great scale, can definitely be helpful because a lot of times jazz musicians will use altered dominant seventh chords that resolve to like a one chord. That's a major and resolving to a minor seventh chord. So you'll hear jazz musicians using a lot of tension in their lines, but again, better than thinking just about like a linear line, think more about the actual chord tones and the extensions that we're doing here. So an A7 is like, right? Like that's a line that you can play that does the sharp 9, the flat 9, right? The flat 13, right? And it has all those sounds in it. So it's better just to be aware of what those extensions are rather than just simply thinking about a linear pattern like an altered scale. That being said, all this is good stuff. All of it's worth exploring. All of it's worth trying and seeing what resonates with you. All right, reveal step 6. Step number 6 is study jazz rhythm and phrasing. Jazz is renowned for its distinctive rhythmic feel and phrasing. Dedicate time to develop your rhythmic sense and exploring various jazz rhythms. Practice playing swing rhythms, syncopations, and different subdivisions, eighth notes, triplets, 16th notes, to internalize the jazz groove. Listen to recordings of jazz drummers and other rhythm section players to absorb their sense of time and feel. Experiment with different articulations and dynamics to add expressiveness to your playing. Developing a strong sense of jazz rhythm and phrasing will greatly enhance your ability to communicate and interact with musicians in a jazz setting. This is actually really good. This is a huge thing about jazz, is the rhythm and phrasing aspect of it. In fact, a lot of times I'll hear students that actually have great jazz language, they have great ideas, they might be very proficient on their instrument, but there's this thing that's missing that's making them sound a little bit amateur. And oftentimes it comes down to this, rhythm and phrasing. So do I endorse this as a step? I absolutely do. One exercise that I like to give my inner circle members when I hear them playing short, chopped up phrases is to exaggerate the process by practicing improvising using the different subdivisions for an entire chorus. So for example, you would start improvising over a tune like Autumn Leaves using only half notes. And then the next chorus you do quarter notes. And then you do only eighth notes. And then you do eighth note triplets. And then if you're playing it slow enough, perhaps you can get to the point of playing 16th notes. Certainly something to practice if you're doing a ballad. But the act of doing this is really helping you get inside of rhythm and subdivisions. Now I really like this part. Listen to recordings of jazz drummers and other rhythm section players to absorb their sense of time feel. But ultimately, we should go back to step number 4, which is where they recommend transcribing short phrases and solos by ear. Because like I mentioned before, this is actually the best way to start internalizing jazz rhythms, phrasing, and time. Like once you start downloading that information and feeling the way great jazz musicians were feeling while they were soloing, that's naturally going to become a part of you. So it's better to do that almost than really getting overly obsessed with practicing rhythms and syncopation if you're a harmonic or melodic player. All right, reveal step 7. All right, step number 7 is understand jazz harmony and chord substitutions. Deepen your understanding of jazz harmony by exploring chord substitutions. Learn about common chord progressions found in jazz, such as the 2-5-1 chord progression and turnarounds. Study different types of chord substitutions, such as tritone substitution, diminished substitution, modal interchange. Understand the concepts of tension and resolution within chord progressions. Analyze how these substitutions can be used to add color and interest to your chord progressions and improvisations. This knowledge will expand your harmonic palette and provide you with more creative options when playing jazz. I do agree mostly with this, except for this idea that you're learning common chord progressions found in jazz, such as the 2-5-1 in this step, because really at this point that should have happened a long time ago, especially if you study tunes like Autumn Leaves. Like, for sure, you will have already done that. But indeed, professional jazz musicians are thinking about these chord substitutions, such as tritone substitutions and backdoor dominance and all that stuff while they're playing. Whether you're a chordal instrument like guitar player or a horn player, like these are things that you can harmonically outline in your solos. So for example, the concept of tritone substitution, if you have a 2-5-1 in concert C major, well, a tritone substitution says that you can substitute a dominant 7th chord for another chord a tritone interval away. So if we were to do the 2 and the 5 in C major is G7. Well, what's a tritone interval away from G? It's D flat. So we can do a tritone substitution of G to resolve to the C major, and it'd sound like this: D minor 7, G flat 7, C major 7. And that's going to inform the decisions that you make while, of course, comping, but also improvising. Technically, that D flat 7 is just like you're playing, you know, an altered dominant 7th chord. It kind of just outlining that particular sound, but it's a harmonic way to understand that. I do agree that this is a little bit more advanced stuff, but I always like to go back to the concept of learning new jazz standards, how important that is to do, because the jazz standards will teach you all of these lessons. You'll come across these different harmonic playgrounds and wonder what they mean, how they work. And there usually is some kind of music theory explanation that will get your brain to wrap around the concept a little bit better. All right, reveal step 8. Step 8 says learn to comp and accompany other musicians. So this one looks like it's a little bit more specific to a chordal instrument like piano or guitar or vibes. Comping, short for accompanying, is an essential skill for jazz musicians. Practice comping using the jazz chords and voicings you've learned earlier. Focus on providing rhythmic and harmonic support to the soloist or vocalist. Experiment with different rhythmic patterns, chord inversions, rhythmic accents to create a dynamic and engaging accompaniment. Study recordings of accomplished jazz pianists or guitarists to observe their comping techniques and how they interact with the soloist. Developing your comping skills will make you a valuable member of any jazz ensemble and improve your overall musicianship. Actually, I find comping is one of the more tricky things to teach how to play, because definitely you can teach voicings and voice leading and inversions. Like, those are all very teachable things for piano and guitar, but how to actually accompany someone really comes down to a lot of intuition. And yes, we can focus on comping patterns that are common, like the bossa nova comping pattern, or simple stuff like the Freddie Green or the Charleston, all great rhythmic starting places. But ultimately, I love the advice that they give of listening to other great compers out there and start figuring out what they are actually doing. But more importantly than all of that, the act of actually accompanying other people is what's going to teach you how to be a great comper. You basically have to go out and start jamming with other people. I would highly recommend, if you're a comping instrument, to try to comp in as many different scenarios as possible. If you're a guitar player, for example, do a guitar and guitar duo, do a guitar and bass duo, do a guitar and vocal duo, do a guitar trio, do a guitar piano, quartet situation. Like, as many different scenarios as possible will teach you the different ways that you need to approach comping and think about what your role in that situation actually is. All right, reveal step 9. Step number 9, collaborate and perform with other musicians. To truly immerse yourself in the world of jazz, it's important to collaborate and perform with other musicians. Seek opportunities to join jazz ensembles, jam sessions, local jazz groups. Playing with others will help you develop your improvisational skills, learn to communicate musically, and adapt to different musical contexts. Pay attention to the dynamics of the group, listen to the other musicians, strive for a cohesive ensemble playing, embrace the experience of performing live, as it will deepen your understanding of jazz as a collaborative and interactive art form. I 100% agree with this. This is probably the very most important piece of advice that artificial intelligence has given us yet. However, it's important to note that this isn't like the 9th step that you would actually do this. You really should start doing this as soon as you possibly can. Like if you know only one tune and you have one friend that you could play it with, then start right away playing with other musicians. I couldn't have really said it any better. Like as I was explaining in step number 8, like to become a better comper or soloist, you really just have to apply all of it in a practical application. You could spend forever in the practice room, and you should work in the practice room, but if you don't go out there and actually apply it, you're basically just getting book knowledge instead of streets knowledge. All right, reveal step 10. Step number 10 is to continuously expand your jazz repertoire and refine your skills. As you progress towards a pro level, continue expanding your jazz repertoire and refining your skills. Explore a wide range of jazz styles, including swing, bebop, cool jazz, modal jazz, fusion, and contemporary jazz. Learn tunes from different eras and by various jazz composers. Focus on developing your improvisational abilities by transcribing solos, practicing melodic development, exploring advanced harmonic concepts. Continuously challenge yourself by tackling more complex tunes and arrangements. Attend jazz workshops, masterclasses, clinics to learn from experienced jazz musicians. Embrace a lifelong commitment to learning and growing as a jazz musician, and remember that jazz is an ever-evolving art form and there's always more to discover and explore. Once again, ChatGPT is 100% correct. Those are all the things you need to continuously be doing to improve as a jazz musician. But of course, the reason why I'm never going to go out of business or lose my job is because this is exactly what you need help with. You need help learning new tunes, applying these things, getting direction and experience. And so that's why we have our Inner Circle membership. Take a look at it in the description down below if it's something you'd be interested in. Now, you may be wondering, how do I actually start improvising? Like, we didn't really go over a lot of those tips and tricks other than learning solos here in this video, but what's a practical way I can actually start if I had zero idea of what to play at all? We'll have a video on the screen called Jazz Improv Explained. It's gonna start from the most basic possible thing ever, a C major scale, and teach you exactly how to start sounding like a bebop pro. So click that on the screen right now. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.